Welcome, everyone. It's 8 o'clock, so we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us early in the morning. My name is Julie Shields-Rutina, and I am the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And this webinar this morning, a deep dive into the FAFSA, is one of our MEFA Institute webinars. I'm glad you found the MEFA Institute, and please know that there are numerous webinars for you, for our colleagues, on all kinds of topics around planning, saving, and paying for college, and that you can receive professional development points for participating. So make sure you go back and you look into that if that's important to you as well. This morning, we're so lucky to have my colleague, Amy Staffier. And Amy is, I might get the title a little bit wrong, but she's the Dean of Enrollment, Student Services, and Director of Financial Aid at Simmons University, and is a long-term financial aid professional, and will have a lot of wisdom to share about this form, which I know is on the top of your minds right now for all of your students and your families. So I'll just give a little bit of housekeeping and we'll dive right in. I will start by saying also that I'm recording this session, and I will send the recording to you tomorrow along with the slides, but I also put the slides in the chat. So if you want to download them right now, that's terrific. I think the best way to type your questions, to ask your questions, is to put them in the Q&A section. It's just easier for me to keep track of them there than in the chat. So type your questions, and we will make sure to answer as many as we can. My colleague Meredith Clement is going to be joining as well. She is our Director of Communications, so she's going to help Amy with the questions as well near the end of the webinar. If you need live transcript, you can press that button and you'll see words that we're speaking right on the screen. And then I'll just say a couple more words about MEFA. MEFA is not for profit here in Massachusetts, and we help families plan, save, and pay for college. We have loans that are low cost for families who need that, and we also have the state savings plans. And then everything else we do is geared toward helping families and students get to college and be able to finance college, and all kinds of free resources for you to help you help your families. I do see that someone said you couldn't see the slides in the chat, and I had that problem last time too. So I apologize, because it says that I put them there. But anyway, I will be sending them to you tomorrow. So that's great. I think with that, I am going to pass it along to you, Amy, to get started on this important topic.
Great, thank you, Julie. So going to jump right in because this is a robust set of slides, and I want to be mindful of your time. So we are diving into the FAFSA form, which is the free application for federal student aid. We always highlight the fact, and when I am talking with students or families, that it is a free form. There was a period of time, and I think that has been taken off the table, that there was a form out there that was like fafsa.gov, and it would charge people to complete the form. And so that's why we just always put that out there. If someone is being charged to complete this form, they should step away, and there are certainly resources available if a family needs help in completing it. There is a demo site that FAFSA has if you wanted to go in and check that out. But it officially opens for the kind of upcoming, the 22-23 year on October 1st. This form, the FAFSA form, is required by all colleges and universities for any sort of federal and state aid. And I would say a large majority of institutions would have a student complete that for any sort of institutional need-based aid as well. So when speaking with students and families, deadlines can range, right, for institutions, for the state, for any state funding. So it's always important to speak about, what is the earliest deadline and know what the deadlines are at each and every school. You can complete this online, but what I say is if you're like me, someone who likes to have something printed and sit and fill it out ahead of time and then go in online and be able to know that I have all of the answers right in front of me and can answer them. There are PDFs available online for people who for them, that's a great way to work. There's skip logic that removes questions, which is nice. The Department of Ed really has done a lot over the years to make the form easier, or as easy as it can be, and particularly with an eye on helping those students and families that are, from the lowest income bands. It does need to be completed each year. And one for each child, but there is an option when completing it to transfer a parent data over, which is at least something. Excuse me. And it's always important to note that when you're speaking with students and families, that they really know and look at each institution that they're thinking about applying to, because there may be another form or two forms that they need to complete, or there may be other materials that they will need to provide to an institution. So that's always really important. The Department of Ed created about 3 years ago a mobile app called myStudentAid. You can complete the FAFSA by using this mobile app. When it first came out, I downloaded it myself, went through and was completing an application just to make sure I knew if I was going to speak about it, because along with my role here at Simmons, I also am tri-chair of FAFSA Day, Massachusetts. And so in speaking with our site coordinators and families, I wanted to make sure if I'm going to talk about this app, that I know it's something that is useful and could be used. So it does allow for both the student and the parent to download that app and complete separately and have that sync up. Students can go between starting on the mobile app or starting on the desktop online and switching, which is great. And then one thing that I always point out with the mobile app is that even if a student decides they don't want to complete the FAFSA on the mobile app, there are other components to this app that are very useful. There's a money kind of budgeting tool in there. And then something that I think is almost critical to have, if a student is going to be borrowing federal student loans, there is a link in the app to the what's called NSLDS, a National Student Loan Database. They can click there, get logged in, and they can see how much they've borrowed, who their lender is, what their monthly payments will be, any contact information. It's right there at the tip of their fingers. I know myself, I always have my phone on me. And for me, having an app where I can, click on something rather than having to go to the computer and type it in is really useful. And I usually always put that out there when I'm meeting with students and parents. And then it's important that both a student and a parent needs an FSA ID in order to begin. On the desktop, a parent can go in without that FSA ID to start. When talking with students or parents, I think it's very wise to provide for them information about what they need in order to complete the FAFSA. While you are able to go in and put in a save key and log out and go back into the application, I think if you are prepared to complete it from start to finish, at the beginning, it's a lot easier and less stressful. So Good things to have on hand: the student driver's license. It asks for that information. It's not required, but if they have that, they put that in. And then student and parent social security number. This is one thing that I highlight to make sure, particularly for the student, that this information that they are putting in for their social security number is correct. I have personally, over the 24 or so years that I have been working in this field, have had to work with students to update and fix a social security error. I had a set of twins where the social security numbers were kind of commingled, and that took me months and months to fix that so that I could disperse their Pell Grants. And so that social security number actually gets attached with the application itself. So if it is wrong, although you can go in and change it, the best way to go about is to complete a brand new FAFSA. So it's really important that they get that right, and that you highlight that to them. Date of birth, and then for students who are seniors right now, so they will be first year in college in the 22-23 year. This FAFSA that opens October 1st is going to be asking about 2020 income information. So the student and parent will need W-2 forms, federal tax information, and records. Now, if a student didn't file a tax return, many students in that senior year in high school are not filing a return. That's fine. They don't need to have those records. They may have a W-2 form though, because they may have been working and just are not required to file. And so they should use that W-2 form to report on income. You can use, and noted here, an IRS data retrieval tool. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it is a process where you go out to the IRS site and it draws in the particular information that is being asked that would come off of a tax return. Even if a parent and a student is deciding, hey, I'm going to use that data retrieval tool, it's still important to have that tax return there and W-2 forms, because let's say that data retrieval tool is down, or the family may not be eligible to use the data retrieval tool. Most are, but there are certain cases, and we'll talk about that. So it really is good to have that. And then for asset information, current bank statements, business and investment records as well. So there is help available. The FAFSA, the Department of Education, has a variety of ways to be able to assist students. The phone number 1-800-4FED-AID is one option. You can email, you can chat through the StudentAid.gov website. And then something that is particularly helpful is that on this last bullet point here, the help icon. So within the FAFSA form, pretty much every single question, you're going to see a question mark that's kind of in a circle that you can click on, and out pops a descriptor helping the student, the parent, to answer the question that is being asked. For instance, on a question, if a family is not able to use the data retrieval tool and they're on the question asking about the parent's AGI, for example, on that help, it will tell the exact line item where you will find that AGI figure. So it really is helpful. So I talked about an FSA ID. The student needs an FSA ID and at least one parent, and that would be in a two-parent household. We will talk about who is considered a parent. That's probably one of the questions I get the most when doing presentations about the FAFSA. But this is really a student and a parent's electronic signature, and not just for the FAFSA form, but they will utilize that FSA ID for applying for, say, a parent loan, signing for a student federal loan on the master promissory note, or just logging into the FSA ID site to get information about their loans and repayment and such. So it's an important item to get. It is something that, you know, can be pre-work. So the FAFSA doesn't open until October 1st for applying for the 22-23 year. But a student and a parent can go in now and get their FSA ID, sign up for that. So fsaid.ed.gov. They have to kind of answer some challenge questions. It can take it. It's not an immediate that they get it right in that moment. So it is kind of something that I suggest is done ahead of time. So completing the FAFSA, if the family is going to the fafsa.gov site, and I have had questions, you know, what is the difference between fafsa.gov and studentaid.gov? fafsa.gov was kind of like the original website for the FAFSA, and it reroutes, this address reroutes exactly to this page that you're seeing right now. And so gets you right to the spot where you're going to complete the FAFSA. A family can go to studentaid.gov, but what they will need to do is in the top bar, they will need to click on, you know, applying for aid, and then there's a drop down, complete the FAFSA, and then it's going to get them to this screen. So the FAFSA is just kind of a quicker, direct way to get to this screen right here. If a student is completing the FAFSA for the first time, they're going to click on that top section, start here. If they have already begun to fill out a FAFSA, they can, or have fully completed, they can log in and then in that bottom spot. So information about the student's state and deadline information. As I talked about in the beginning, there's a variety of deadlines, right? So there's a school deadline. There are multiple school deadlines because not every school has the same deadline. And then each state has their own deadline to be eligible for state-based grants. In Massachusetts, for instance, this would be May 1st or May 30th that you have to get the FAFSA completed by. But for most students, they're going to be making sure that they meet the institutional deadline because that is going to be a lot earlier. But at least gives you information about, you know, state deadlines here. Depending on who is going in to complete the FAFSA. If it's the student, they're going to obviously click on that radio button, I am the student, and want to access the FAFSA form. If it's a parent going in and beginning the form, they're clicking off as I am the parent. And they're going to see different information, you know, after they click on that radio button and proceed through. So for students, they're going to log in with their FSA ID, or if they don't have it yet, they can create one, or they can use personal identifiers, name, date of birth, social security number. If they are creating the FSA ID right here in the moment, typically it takes, as I said before, you know, a day or two to kind of finalize that FSA ID. So I always like to guide students and families to create that FSA ID ahead of time. You can then sit and complete and fully sign the FAFSA in one sitting. If the parent is going in, they are entering the student's name, date of birth, social security number. And that's how they are entering. This is just, you know, disclaimer, and it's something that we just move through and accept. It's saying, you know, this is only used and nothing is being recorded, etc. So to start that 22-23 FAFSA, they will be alerted if they need to create an FSA ID. And so, you know, again, just part of the process. We're going through screen by screen, line by line here. The student or parent can create a save key. This saves for about 45 days. It just is a quicker way in. So on that entrance screen where we saw returning user, they could pop in there, put in this save key, and come right back into completing the FAFSA if they needed to log out. As I said, there's help available, and this is just really kind of walking through a section of help. They can review the resources. How do I get help? How many steps are there? Can I save the FAFSA form? What documents? And these are some of the things we've already just spoken about prior to getting to the actual data. You'll see, and I still point at my computer screen as if I'm doing a presentation live, and you can see what I'm pointing at, but I am noting that at the top of the screen, you'll see the 1 through 7. So those
Amy, can I stop you for a moment?
Please. Yep.
The slides aren't advancing.
Oh, that's weird.
So we are at the FSA ID slide.
Oh, interesting. Well, let me see what I can do about that. That's very strange. Try and share my screen again. Do you see the screen?
Let's see what we see now.
Do you see introduction?
Introduction. Let's get started.
All right. Now, if I just make sure that if I move this, can you see now tips?
Tips. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Right,
sorry, I was going along and.
That's great. I'll interrupt you if it happens again. Okay, great.
Thank you. Thanks for stopping me. So on this screen, as I said, there are 7 sections to complete the FAFSA. So it's really actually kind of nice that they have added that, that as you progress how far you are from the end, and that there are just these 7 steps. Additionally, there's the button at the top where you can save. You can also kind of review the form, and then there is general help at the top, but you'll also see here for each of these questions, so security number, name, you see the question mark in a circle, and so you can click on any of those and get further information on that. Also, always important to remind students, but more so parents, I think, is where I see it, is that when the FAFSA is referring to you, it is you, the student, not the parent. I have seen instances where a parent goes in and maybe because they see your social security number, they all of a sudden put their own social security number in here. I've seen where I've had parent information repeated in the parent section as well as the student section. So just noting that, that you is always referring to the student, and to pay attention to those top headers, right? So this is student demographic information. So this is really just hitting home on that. Student information, it's always going to let you know right there at the top what you are filling out. And students should, as I'm sure you all know, use an email address that they are checking often. I always suggest that it is not, sometimes, and I have 2 high school daughters myself, not to use, a school-based email address, because this actually will follow the student. They will get reminders to this email address in future years to remember to complete the FAFSA for the upcoming year. All right, did I just feel like my clicker is moving slowly? So if a student happens to live in a foreign country, they would select foreign country in the state drop down.
That one didn't advance, Amy,
oh my
just
goodness.
so you know that.
I don't know what to do.
You know what? How about we do, I think I might do this. Sorry, everyone. Let me see if I'm going to take the share screen back.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, please.
Let's see if I can share mine.
Never had a problem.
Let's just see if that works. We'll just see.
Perfect.
Let me find it. Right over here. Yep. Okay.
So I think it's the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we were on 19, if that helps, or 20 actually. Perfect, right here. Yep. So again, if a student lives in a foreign country, they put foreign country in the state field, and then they can put all zeros into that zip code so that they can move forward to the next section. Next slide. So what students are eligible for federal financial aid? U.S. citizens, and then eligible non-citizens. So we've listed right here the students who fall into that eligible non-citizen category. Students will have their citizenship verified by one of two agencies. So for US citizens, it's the Social Security Administration. And then for eligible non-citizens, that's verified through the Department of Homeland Security. And I would like to point out that I recently had one of my financial aid counselors ask me, oh, this is odd. This student we're having to verify their citizenship status, but they were here last year, completed a FAFSA, and we didn't have to collect any documentation because it basically falls on us if that is not verified through one of these agencies. So I had a suspicion, and when I looked in this current year, they had listed that they are a US citizen, and that's where we were having to verify that. But in a previous year, they had listed that they are an eligible non-citizen. They provided their A number there, and that was verified through Homeland Security. So it really is important that the question of, your status, US citizen or eligible non-citizen, that's being answered accurately. So current high school students should be selecting, and it's interesting because we see errors all the time, and sometimes it can be challenging, or because it's something new for a senior in high school to be completing this form. But they should select that they're working on their first bachelor's degree, as well as that they will not have a first bachelor's before 22-23. The question about work study, I often have students inquiring as to how they should answer this and what that kind of locks them potentially into. And so by answering yes, it does not obligate the student to work. It also does not guarantee them a job. And it also, very important, does not cause the student to lose grants or scholarships. Personally, when I am doing presentations to students, whether it's at my institution or anywhere else, I always say, answer yes. It opens up some opportunities for you, but as noted here, typically at an institution, if you've been given a work study kind of allocation, you will have to, as a student, actively find a job on campus and be hired into that job in order to then earn those funds. Again, it has no bearing on how much grant or scholarship aid is going to be provided to you. So in my eyes, by answering no, you're kind of immediately shutting out some opportunities for some great jobs on campus that might be open up to you. So the FAFSA is going through some changes. There are some that are being implemented early and then some that are being pushed off. You may have heard about some of these changes. Some of them will be quite significant, but we're still a few years off from those being implemented. But one of them that is has been put in early is the fact that it used to be that if a male student was not registered with Selective Service and was already 18, they are not eligible to receive federal financial aid. That has been changed. A male student who is 18 or older and has not registered with Selective Service now will be eligible for federal aid. They do still ask this question, but it's just not affecting a student's eligibility for aid. As I mentioned in the beginning, having that student's driver's license number, they're going to ask for that. It's not required. If the student doesn't have a license, they can continue on past this question. It's going to ask about students' foster care and parent education completion. These could be items that a state might be using to reach out to student, or an institution might use information here. But with these questions, it also is not required. Next slide, sorry. The student will need to add their high school. They select the state, the city's optional. They can put in the high school name and just make sure that you know, it's listed accurately there. Institutions, you know, need to collect that information. Next slide. So it's important here, you'll note if you can read that top section where it says, based on information you provided, we've determined you may qualify for federal student aid. This does not mean that a student is qualifying for grants or scholarships. It may mean that they are eligible for loan funding. So just kind of putting that out there, because I think oftentimes it can be confusing and people think federal student aid or aid means grants or scholarships, but it may mean just loans. And putting in the school selection. So I have had students or families that were very adamant about wanting to complete this as early as possible. So, you know, right in that very beginning of October timeframe, but then wonder, well, I don't know if these are all of the schools that the student is applying to, or we just have one school. So you can complete the FAFSA, just list one school on there, and then you can go back in and add schools to your list. That is absolutely fine. A student can have no more than 10 institutions at a time listed on the FAFSA form. So if a student is applying to more than 10 schools, what I typically tell a student is prioritize in that first submission the schools with the earliest deadlines and get those on there. Then typically wait about 3 to 5 days because it takes a few days for institutions to get the FAFSA data. We talked about checking with the, you know, if a student is a US citizen or permanent resident, there are a small group of checks that have to happen before data then flows back to an institution. And so that's why there's that, you know, 3 to 5 day kind of lag. Waiting that time, a student can go back in. They can remove a school because that institution will have already gotten that information electronically, and then add a school on, and now that institution will get that information electronically. At the end of the day, when the student knows what institution they will be attending, they just want to make sure that that institution is still listed on their FAFSA form, because let's say they need to make an update, or the institution does, it will need to be listed on there in order to kind of proceed forward. Next slide. So students and parents can view college information. So if they are going on to add a school, they can actually click on this View College Info button, and it's going to give a small snapshot of some data points, the federal school code, the address, a website, if they wanted to shoot off there. Personally, I would feel like I'm going in every which direction, and I would encourage students, because this information, the View College Info, this is coming from the college scorecard. What I typically have students do when I talk about the kind of college financial aid process in full, the beginning part is doing research. And part of that research is looking at the college scorecard information, which gives you tuition information, net price information, or what they call here average annual cost. So that's taking the average cost of attendance for students and subtracting average amount of scholarships and grants and what that cost looks like. But there's a whole host of more data points, not just financial information about test scores are on there as well. So in my own personal suggestion, I would say doing that ahead of time is better. But if they have not done that, it's good to be at least view some bits of information here. They will need to select their housing status for each institution that they're adding on. Institutions are going to use, many institutions, I should say, will use this data to determine the cost of attendance they're using. So part of the cost of attendance is living or room and board. So if a student's living, say they want to live on campus, we're going to be using our on-campus room and board charges. If a student says they're going to be living at home with parents, right, we're going to be using a smaller figure because it's not as large as paying this room and board or paying full rent as off campus. Some institutions will be changing that information. For instance, at my institution, we had set everyone to on campus for that initial financial aid award. We let them know that that's what their financial aid is based on. Then if a student decides that they are going to try to live at home, we will readjust their financial aid. But every institution is different in how they work things. And at my previous institution, I was at Harvard for like 21 years before that. We didn't even look at the FAFSA, but all students were required to live on campus. And so we would base their financial aid on that on-campus room and board. Next slide. So we're just about done with the student questions, the kind of demographic questions, and determining actually, do we need to collect parent information? So this is a dependency determination. So a dependent student will have to provide information about their parents. A student who has been deemed independent does not need to provide information about their parent. So there are kind of standard ways that a student becomes independent, and that is if they are married, if they are in graduate school, if they are 24 or older, have dependents who receive their support. You can see the rest of the bullet points here. These answers of yes, are automatically the student becomes independent. It should be noted that some institutions may require verification of a status. So for instance, homeless, in a legal guardianship, an institution may say, we need to receive some information to kind of prove that status and that you are independent. Next slide. So the majority of students coming out of high school are dependent students, and therefore they would need to provide information about their parents. Excuse me, and this is kind of the screen that they get to. You'll note at the bottom of the screen, there are two radio buttons. One, I will provide information about my parents, right? So that's the more standard that the student's going to click that and they're going to move on and give that parent information. But there certainly are many cases where a student does not qualify kind of in the more automatic way to be an independent student, but they're unable to provide parent information. I have seen situations where parent is incarcerated or a student is living with a grandparent and maybe the parents are completely out of the picture. You know, unusual circumstances of abuse, things like that. In those scenarios, a student has the option to click this radio button and not provide parent information. You should always counsel a student that they should reach out to each institution that they are applying to, because the institution is going to need to take action in order to provide a financial aid award for that student in order to kind of fully complete the FAFSA form. It's called something called a dependency override. Institutions all have, you know, a process of going through this. Typically, the student is going to have to provide some sort of letter that they are kind of stating what their situation is, and then some sort of third-party documentation. So that may be a school counselor, it may be, you know, some other adult in the child's life. Next slide. So this is where we start to get into who is completing the FAFSA, who is the parent. So there is this sheet that nicely goes through the different scenarios of who should be completing the FAFSA. So that is helpful for parents. So if there is any confusion going into it, they should know that this information is here. I believe the next slide walks through, I guess not, but that's fine. Who is the parent? I thought it was on a slide. So parents who are living together, whether or not they are married, information for both parents, their kind of financial information is going to be required to be on the FAFSA form. Parents who are divorced or separated, right, and are fully living separately. For now, it's the student, it is the parent that the student lives with more. So their information is what is put on the FAFSA. In instances, and I've had this where a student said, well, I live equally with both parents. Then it gets down to who provides more support. And then it would be that parent's information. This is something that will be changing in the coming years. I'm referencing some changes that were put into place in December that were approved, but that are about 2 years out. The Department of Ed is changing it so that it is who provides more support is the kind of custodial parent and whose parent information should be on the FAFSA. And if a student was legally adopted, that parent's information should also be on the FAFSA form. All right, next slide. Excuse me. So yeah, so I knew there was a slide on this, but the question, the one slide right before, which you don't need to go back to, is just, you know, what is your marital status? So answering that, know that, and this is always something that I feel like can be difficult for parents who are remarried and they are the ones that are completing the FAFSA, and they'll say, but this step parent has their own children and they are not responsible for paying, for my child's education. Unfortunately, as far as the federal government is concerned, if a custodial parent is remarried, that step parent's information is to be on the FAFSA form. And I think that's the only bit here that I would have missed in my my earlier description there. So I'm going to have to put in parent demographic information. It used to be that the FAFSA had, father, mother, and putting that in, but they went away from that and really are having more inclusive language. So enter information for your first parent, because in same-sex couples, this is really, helping to have those parents feel included in this process. I typically just say, remember who you have listed as parent A and parent B, for instance, because when you are answering questions, moving on to financial questions, you're going to be putting in the earnings for, parent A and then parent B. So who is included in the questions about the household and the household size? So always the student and then the parents, right? If they're all living in the household. If the parents have other children, even if they don't live with the parents, if the parents are going to be providing more than half of their financial support in that upcoming award year, so the 22-23 year. Other people who live with the parents, typically what I've seen is, grandparents are living in the household. Then the caveat is, as long as the parents provide more than half of their financial support, and will continue to do so in that upcoming award year. So here, the 22-23 year. And then on the next slide, we talk about the next question that comes up is, who in that household will be in college? So you're always going to include the student, even if they are going to be attending less than half-time. You're including other members, other children typically, only if they will attend at least half-time in a program that leads to a college degree or certificate. So if the student is just taking, kind of a non-degree one class, that they would not count. Also know that institutions many times will collect verification of another household member in college. If a parent is in college, they are never included as in college on the FAFSA. Moving on to the next slide, we are getting into that financial information. I am going to go through this with looking at the parent information. Students' information is basically exactly the same, but we'll hit on that at the end. So again, for the 22-23 year, we are looking at 2020 tax information. This certainly makes it easier for families, particularly if they're in a senior in high school and applying, where deadlines are much earlier than when students are reapplying for financial aid once they're in school. It used to be very stressful for students and particularly parents when they were trying to meet a deadline when it was just the year that has just basically ended and they were trying to complete the form. So most families have already completed that 2020 tax return. It's going to ask about the completion status. So is it completed, will complete? Those are some of the statuses you'd find. What type of return the student is completing. And then what their filing status is, right? Married, single, married filing separate. And then there's the option, once you kind of put that data in about what type of tax return, it's having the option to utilize that IRS data retrieval tool. If a family wants to use that, a parent wants to use that, they can click on the Proceed to IRS site and it sends you off. You have to use your FSA ID. We move on to the next slide. It talks about the data retrieval tool. You'd be taking this family, it would be taking 2020 certain data elements from that 2020 tax return. Only the data elements that are required on the FAFSA, AGI, taxes paid, and then there are a couple of untaxed income data points on the FAFSA. If a family happened to have a rollover of retirement funds, they're going to be asked whether or not that is correct and what that amount is. If parents are married filing jointly, they will need to hand enter in earnings. So there's earnings for parent A and parent B. They will have to put that in because it gets lumped into one figure on the tax return, typically one figure. And then there are certain individuals that are automatically ineligible to use the data retrieval tool. So married parents who file separately or head of household, parents with unmarried and both legal parents living together, and then any parent or student who filed a Puerto Rican tax return or foreign tax return, they are also ineligible to use the data retrieval tool. Next slide. So if a family, parent, student decides not to use the DRT or they are not eligible, they can hand enter that information. Again, as I stated, AGI, taxes paid, amount earned from working, and some other untaxed income information. They click on the question mark for any of those questions if there's confusion, and it's clarified in that pop-up box that comes up in the, it used to be called help and hints, but now they just change it to a question mark. But that's really useful because it guides the parent to exactly where they need to look to get that information. There's certain items that will deduct from income. So it will ask if there's been any child support paid. And then the next two, as well as the second to last bullet point about, earnings from co-op or work study or grants and scholarships. Typically, I don't see this often. Sometimes I will see it for returning students, typically on the work study side. So if they have work study earnings, they should be entering that in because it actually deducts from their income and reduces their expected family contribution. And then it will ask about education credits. And then moving on to untaxed income. So payments to tax deferred pension, retirement savings, those are going to go in. IRA, someone who might be self-employed as well, that data comes off the tax return. If child support was received rather than paid, that's going to be untaxed income that is counted. Tax exempt interest, that also comes off of the tax return itself. As well as the untaxed portion of an IRS distribution and untaxed portion of pensions. Those also come off the tax return. And again, those line items will be noted in that help and hints section. And then any sort of housing living allowance, typically we see this with military or clergy might have that. Veterans non-education benefit, what I've seen is typically a disability or a death pension. And then other untaxed income, workers' compensation, disability as well. So that concludes the kind of financial income portion. Then we move on to assets. Now, this is a change that went into place, a few years ago, where rather than just asking everyone about asset information, based on the answers for income, the parent will have a question here saying, as of today, does your total parent, current assets exceed, and then there'll be a figure there. Again, that is based off of what their income answers are. So If it doesn't exceed that amount, they can actually bypass answering, if they want to, the questions about assets. They could still answer them as well, but if their assets exceed whatever that number is listed there, then they will be required to answer. So what they are answering is total balance of like cash, savings, checking account. The next question goes into investments, never including the primary home as an investment. But if a family has a second home, whether that's a vacation home or a rental property, they should be including the value of that. Additionally, let's say a family owns a 3-family, they're living in one floor of that 3-family, they should be including 2/3 as as an asset. And then the last question is about business or farm. And you'll see noted here that a family does not include the value of a family business or farm if they have 100 or fewer full-time employees. So I really just went through the data. So I think we can go on to the next slide. So as I noted when we began talking about parent income information, next it asks about student, both income and asset information, and they are the exact same questions. I do see that oftentimes students who are coming right out of high school, most of these answers are 0 or will not file. And if the student did not file and they say will not file, they're really only going to ask about what sort of earnings you had. If it's 0, they enter 0. If they had some earnings, from a W-2 or other means, they would just put that there. So at this point, the parent has gone through all of the sections, the demographic section, the school selection, and the financials. So they have gotten to the end and they are able to sign and submit. So it is a process that, if the student and parent are sitting there together, the student is clicking on that blue box, provide student signature. If they are already logged in with their FSA ID, they're basically, once they get in through here, they're just confirming that they are signing and submitting the form. Then the parent will need to go in and provide their signature. Oftentimes when I've sat with families doing this, the parent is going to have to log in, put in their FSA ID, and then sign. There are some situations I've had, a parent who is not a US citizen, so they are not able to get an FSA ID. They don't have a social security number. You can print a signature page, do a wet signature and mail that in. They will give you the information of where to send that. It's going to take a little bit longer for that to be a finalized FAFSA. So in the situation of, making changes or adding additional schools, in that scenario, or if a parent has not signed at this point and the student signed, it sits out for about 7 days waiting for that signature. If in about 7 days they have not received that signature of the parent, then central processing will push that electronic information on to all of the schools. There'll be a note that goes to the school. It also goes to the student saying, it hasn't been signed by the parent and it needs that parent signature before it can be fully finalized. So that's just something to note. The next slide. So, yep, I already went through that of how you can sign. Once it has been signed, you're going to get to that nice congratulations page. It was successfully submitted. And then the family will receive this expected family contribution number here. They might want to note that if they are looking to utilize that in any way. Hopefully they don't get the 9999 figure. Sometimes I think about our lowest income families, and viewing this page might be a little bit scary, but for most, low income families, if their income is 50,000 or less, about 95% of those families are going to be the students receiving a Pell Grant. So that Pell Grant is really reserved for the lowest income families. They'll also provide some bullets here that the student's going to receive an email of this page, so they shouldn't feel like they have to print it or screenshot that. That it's going to go on to the institutions, and really any questions about a financial aid package should be directed to the institution. From my point of view, I talk about the Pell Grant, but that's really the only grant option through the FAFSA, and a good majority of funding is going to come from an institution. And it may even be in a case of someone who has a 99999 expected family contribution, that they are even receiving some funding from an institution, particularly if it's a higher cost private institution. There might be some merit dollars that are there. And if you are completing for a second child, as I referenced in the beginning, you do have the option to transfer that parent data over to another FAFSA, which at least is helpful. In any sort of special circumstances, any communication should go to the financial aid office. Of course, it's a little more challenging for a first year student who's applying to multiple schools, right? Because they do have to communicate with each and every institution. What I suggest to students and families, if there are special circumstances, let's say in 2020, both parents were employed, and in 21, where they're currently living in, let's say both parents are unemployed, or a parent has passed away, and there is a loss of income, that they should write out what is going on, so that they have a narrative that they are able to provide to each school. Now, each school may have a different process for providing information and asking for an appeal, and every institution may have a different point in time. I would say the majority of them, if they are able to do what's called a need-based appeal, where they're going to say, yes, provide us with this information about your special circumstances, the majority of schools would tell you to wait until you've received a financial aid letter from the institution. And then at that point, you're either providing that letter and some documentation, or perhaps there is an online form that walks you through that. You're still going to have to provide some sort of narrative as well as some sort of documentation. So what happens after families submit the FAFSA? Colleges are going to receive that, as we said. Also, the state automatically receives that. So it's based on the question of what state are you living in? And when you, let's say here in Massachusetts, you put Massachusetts, it's going to go directly to our Office of Student Financial Assistance, and they will determine whether or not you're eligible for state funding. They'll also communicate with the student as well as institutions. Students are going to receive what's called a student aid report. It's simply a listing of everything that was completed on the FAFSA, as well as the data points of the expected family contribution, as well as any follow-up that may need to happen. So one of them is this third bullet point, verification. Verification is, in theory happens randomly, although oftentimes I feel like families who might be eligible for the Pell Grant, since those are the grant dollars, might get selected. We, as the institution, have to follow up and communicate with the families to say, you were selected for verification, you were notified on the FAFSA, here's what we need in order to complete verification. We're required to verify certain income elements, so AGI, taxes paid, basically what came through on the data retrieval tool. So that is one benefit of using the data retrieval tool, is you're not going to have to provide a verification of that income, which would be either completing the data retrieval tool after the fact, providing a tax transcript or a signed tax return. And then the other item that we have to verify is household size and number in college. So typically that would be called a verification worksheet. So we communicate with students, but it's just an extra step in the process. And then colleges will be sending out, financial aid offers typically March through April. Some institutions may provide, if a student applied early, they may provide information to the student early about their estimated financial aid. But again, as I always say, it depends. It depends on the institution, and every institution kind of works slightly different. So it's always helpful for students to look at the website for each institution, note what their deadlines are, what forms they're requiring, what is their communication timeline. So at least they're setting expectations for themselves. So there's some resources here in the community. So I believe I mentioned at the beginning, I'm one of the tri-chairs of FAFSA Massachusetts and have been for the past 3 or so years. FAFSA provides free assistance in completing the FAFSA. In kind of normal circumstances, we have always provided in person at about 30 different sites across the state of Massachusetts, one-on-one help. Last year during the pandemic, we were providing monthly from October through February presentations very similar to this. For families to sit through. We are once again going to provide some presentations, but then we are also going to provide, along with MEFA is doing some as well, really breakout rooms and Zoom, so someone can come and just have a question answered, or someone will sit with that family as they're completing the full FAFSA, because sometimes a student or a parent just needs to know that someone is right there and it can help and answer the question for them. And that's the support that we provide. And then also we have Mass EdCo, where they provide free financial aid help. So that's another great resource to provide to students and families. Things to do, register for any upcoming MEFA Institute webinars. I have been volunteering for MEFA for a long time and believe in them. The information they provide to students and families is exceptional, as well as I've always been impressed that they put so much time and effort into creating resources for our partners, at high schools. So that's really wonderful. And then share these resources with families. I have over the years signed up for, newsletters through MEFA. I always want to make sure if I'm going to put them out there as a good resource, I want to make sure that I'm receiving it as well. And I kind of endorse that. And so personally, myself, I do. And I now have a daughter who's a senior in high school. So I'm going through this process myself, which is very interesting. MEFA.org/counselors is information specific to the counselor lens rather than the parent student. And then again, encourage families. There's many webinars out there, the FAFSA, the profile, and then there are the financing presentations, which are kind of a more robust, that are hitting on the total process, less of a deep dive into the FAFSA, although it touches on it, but really gives a very good full-blown overview of the financing process. Suggest that students and parent sign up for that FSA ID, so they have that all set. And then as I was mentioning, 100% researching financial aid deadlines, applications. It may be so at Simmons we only require students to complete a FAFSA. When I first got here 3 years ago, it was a FAFSA and an institutional application. And I have seen over the years of volunteering and helping students where there were a few schools that had an institutional application as well, and a student had no idea that that was being required. So here, just the FAFSA, fairly simple. When I worked at Harvard, it was the FAFSA, it was the profile, it was tax returns, it was business tax returns. So again, every school is different in what they are requiring, and a student wants to make sure that they aren't missing anything in the process, and they know for each school what that deadline is and what's required.
So Amy, I'm going to ask, we are not at 9:10. So I'm going to see if we can we have a few questions, but maybe we'll try to get them in the next 5 minutes. We'll just kind of do rapid fire. And if you have further questions, want to talk about it more, please know you can always just get in touch with MEFA and we can talk more about it. But let me ask these few questions that I thought would be good ones for everyone to hear your answer to. So one, we get this a lot. This counselor has a family who's wondering if it matters to fill out the FAFSA, even though they know they will be paying for most of their students' college out of pocket. Is it expected that parents fill out the FAFSA in cases like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and sometimes I feel like it, this is what I always say, it depends. But there may be an institution that requires, that to be considered for any aid that they complete the FAFSA. I spoke about merit aid. Typically, I would think that for merit aid, an institution is not requiring you to complete the FAFSA, but they may. And so in my eyes, really going through the form, although it can seem like this large obstacle for families, it can be done in 20 minutes. And so the other option is, if you want the student to possibly borrow some loans to help, you would need to complete the FAFSA, as well as if a parent was deciding that they were going to utilize a federal parent loan, you're actually required to have a FAFSA on file. So those would be my 3 scenarios. I personally believe in providing the information of what those scenarios are, and then it's the parent's decision whether or not they want to file, but it would be asking the institution, if the student doesn't file the FAFSA, does that exclude them from any sort of, funding that's available to them? And then again, if the parent wanted to utilize a plus, or if they wanted the student to utilize some loan funding.
All right. Amy, could you just talk a little bit about, I know we get this question a lot too, the order of listing your schools, and does it matter?
Yeah.
And I think what counselors are usually asking about is that public institution piece with state funding.
Yep. So my understanding was that there was a period of time that some institutions were that were using information of rank and where the school was listed, and using that and perhaps prioritizing money. Oh, they must want to go here because we're first on the list. And the FAFSA, the Department of Ed, made a change to that, so an institution can no longer see that order, so that does not matter.
Great. Let me just ask this. If someone's seeking asylum pending a refugee visa, is someone seeking asylum pending a refugee visa an eligible non-citizen? He just received a social security number.
Just received a social security number. So I know that refugee and asylum, there is, I guess what I would want to say is that I would rather you reach out, and I'm happy to be a resource, because in those situations, I always want to go back to the regulations and make sure, because there are situations where when someone's kind of in a pending status, they may not be eligible. And sometimes getting to that finalized state takes some time, and I would not want to give incorrect information. The fact that they have a social security number may feel like it's a little more settled, but I would feel more comfortable personally, diving into the federal regulations and just confirming that. So I'm happy to provide my information, and I can follow up with that person.
And thank you, Amy. Do I need to include my income if I'm on workers' comp or partial disability?
So there are certain income points that are not asked about. So disability is one of them. There used to be, and then I'm completely aging myself, in a FAFSA about 20 years ago, where it had for untaxed income these kind of Section A and Section B. And Section A was typically items that a lot of low income families had, and they completely removed asking about those. So disability is one of those, and the other one, it was workers' comp. That one, I feel like maybe, again, it's one of those ones where I might want to just look back and verify that so that I'm not giving incorrect information. But I think workers' comp might be included.
That's great. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you. Someone else is just saying thank you and how helpful this was.
And perhaps, Julie, if I just do the research, I will provide you the information. I heard that you're going to follow up with slides in an email.
Yes.
So if I provide that, then you can just put that on so that everyone gets that information.
That would be terrific. That would be terrific. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Amy, for that. And for this just great, thorough, detailed presentation. I hope that was helpful to all of you, and what an engaged group with terrific questions. So I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day, and please stay in touch with any other questions and help we can offer to you. So thanks, everyone.